I am interviewing Stefan Carpenter. He has a background in environmental policy, public policy, political science, and law. So are you a specialist in human wildlife conflict in the United States or Kenya? What is your focus?
So I'm interested in the issue broadly. In the US and Europe, a lot of the conflict animals have been taken care of. And I mean that in air quotes, right?
Yeah.
We don't have wolves. I hope you can't hear my dog, by the way, who's going nuts. So we've taken care of, there are no more, other than maybe the occasional vagrants. We don't have any mountain lions on the East Coast. We don't have any wolves on the East Coast, right? We've taken care of a lot of the problem animals. And so where you find a lot of this stuff happens to be in Africa and Asia, and to some extent out in Latin America. But I'm interested in the issue more broadly. I happen to have some background experience already in Namibia. And when I was getting my PhD, there was somebody who did a lot of work in Eastern Africa as well. So I got involved there as well. There's some fascinating stuff going on from a human-wildlife conflict standpoint, and I can explain what that is in a second. But fundamentally, the issues are not limited to there. They're found anywhere you have wildlife. So what human-wildlife is, it's where interests of humans and wildlife conflict, and there's tension there. The way that it tends to be used is an operational term. It looks more at where wildlife negatively impacts people. Obviously, I hit an armadillo with my car. There's armadillos lots of places, but an armadillo hits my car, and other than me needing to wipe down my bumper, it doesn't mean much to me. It obviously means a great deal to that armadillo. But we wouldn't tend to use that as a conflict. Where you tend to get the term human-wildlife conflict is more that animal is doing something that conflicts with my needs and has some tangible impact on me.
Human-oriented.
The reason why I'll give a couple examples. If I have livestock and a wolf or some predator takes one of my livestock, that is human-wildlife conflict. Birds, deer, whatever that graze on people's crops, it can get down to insects. We don't tend to think of it that way much, but a locust swarm, that's pretty conflicty. The reason we tend to look at it from a human standpoint is humans oftentimes retaliate, right? There's either preventative killing. I'm worried it's going to eat my dog, or I'm going to take care of it before it has a chance to do that. The wolf comes in and eats the cow, and I'm going to take care of that wolf, right? It has no business doing that.
So retaliate. It's kind of an emotional word.
People tend to anthropomorphize or whatever. So people tend to ascribe human intention to wildlife. Most people aren't anti-wildlife in the wild. People don't think of where they live as being wild unless they're intentionally choosing a place for that, right? I walked out this morning and there's a coyote on my driveway. Doesn't bother me. I'm kind of a wildlife guy. I'm like, oh, cool. But yeah, people around you start freaking out. Like, well, what's it doing here? This is a neighborhood. It doesn't belong here.
Who doesn't belong there?
Actually, it's funny. The coyotes filled a niche that people have created in this area. Coyotes didn't used to exist in Florida. The red wolf was there and kept coyotes out. Coyotes have spread to fill in an ecological void left by us wiping out all the other predators. There was a reintroduction effort in North Carolina. At one point, it was up to a few hundred individuals in the wild. There's a breeding, so that I'm going to put a giant asterisk beside this and say that there's a great deal of debate among geneticists about whether the red wolf is actually a wolf or if it's a wolf-coyote hybrid. But right now, according to the endangered species list, the red wolf is a wolf subspecies. Yeah, they were rounded up. All remaining wild ones were captured. They did purity tests, found pure-blooded red wolves, and then bred them and released them. And that did well until it didn't. And North Carolina pushed back. And to the best of my knowledge, there's less than 20 left in the wild. So we're probably going to have them go extinct in the wild a second time. But let's step back, right? So there's this idea that things are invading I'm not going in and bothering them. Why are they coming in and bothering me? And that ascribes awareness rather than, look, I'm an animal and, oh, look, there's some easy food. Like all of us would make that choice given the same circumstance. But there's a sense that it's somehow an invasionary thing. And so the term retaliation, there's a huge amount of emotion that goes into it. I don't say that to minimize the human side. If I were a rancher and that's my livelihood and I walk out and something's killing my cattle, I'm understandably going to be furious, right? And I'm going to take care of it. So I'm not trying to paint any side as wrong, but there's a ton of stuff that gets wrapped up in human wildlife conflict.
A mountain lion shows up in someone's yard.
Some animals are quite happy living alongside people. It may not flow the other way, right? So a lot of times bears habituated to hanging around where people are because they're easy pickings, right? People don't secure their trash. And so if you're a bear, especially if you're a bear in an area where you need to fatten up for the winter, you're grabbing the easiest calorie source you can. And that might be garbage cans. It doesn't mean that there's not sufficient space out there necessarily, but it's like people who come down to Florida and feed alligators. Well, it doesn't take long before an alligator hangs around where the people are, feed food. So the deer populations exploded in part because we took away predators and in part because deers like lawns. And what people do is they cut down trees and they make little sort of edge areas where there's grass, and that works well. In some cases, it's because there's maybe not enough space. Or the best case scenario is the species expanding, which is what you want it to do if it's endangered. But where does it go once it taps out its natural areas? What's happening with the Florida panther right now is the populations has rebounded to the extent that you have panthers that have moved out of formal protected areas and they're moving onto ranch lands because that's what's left. So it depends, right?
When someone says mountain lion, they're talking about puma, a cougar.
It's all the same thing. Puma, cougar, catamount, the mountain lion, they're all the same. Panther, there are recognized subspecies of panther, catamount. I'm not sure if the Florida panther is technically a different subspecies than on, say, California. Even if they're not different species, you do get regional differences. The Florida panther's smaller than some of the ones that live up in the Rockies. You tend to find it's in the heat, need to conserve a ton of body heat.
Right.
So oftentimes hotter places have generally smaller animals than in really cold places because you want to have as much bulk versus surface area as you can. So the listeners know, the Florida panther is basically the last remnant of panthers found on the eastern seaboard, really to the east of the Mississippi with any regularity. The Florida panther subpopulation used to basically be more or less the southeast of the U.S., and then you had a northeast different subspecies. There's really no more established populations. Males will walk hundreds of miles. So you'll get the occasional male looking for love in all the wrong places, right? Because there's no other animals. Florida panther males have been hit by cars up in Georgia, which is how we know they're up there. But the established population, the only one left in the eastern seaboard is the Florida panther. For a long time constrained down to just the Everglades.
The effort to see their numbers rebound, is that done at the federal level or is that the Florida legislature?
So both the U.S. and states have their own set of listing for endangered and threatened. So the Florida panther is on the U.S. endangered species list. There's different ways to get on there. Even if it isn't technically its own subspecies, it's basically what's known as a distinct population. It's unique. And so Florida also has it. Sometimes you can get species that land on state endangered or threatened lists that are not on the federal one because the states look within the geographic boundaries of the state, whereas the U.S. is looking. So you may have a lot of a certain animal, but very little of it in a particular state. So the Florida black bear, for example, was on the list for a while, whereas black bear is not particularly endangered on a federal level. So once you're listed, that puts in place certain protections. It can involve critical habitat and the sort of preservation of critical habitat. It oftentimes involves what you can do that will impact the living animals right now. But generally speaking, it doesn't always require the creation of new land. That is species by species, and it doesn't necessarily result in money being allocated to help the species recover. There's lots of endangered species that have no funding whatsoever. And so what you get is you get kind of the charismatic ones, they get some money, and the skinks of the world don't get a whole lot. Habitat loss is probably the biggest driver worldwide. We love to cut things down and clear stuff, and there's money to be made in clearing out forests and there's just the way the system's kind of designed. If I buy a lot of land, it's not worth much unless I put cattle on it or I clear it or I do something. But there are other drivers too. So you can, especially in island areas, a lot of times it's not habitat loss, it's invasive species. In some places it's over harvesting, right? So think about caviar, right? That causes people to run out and catch certain types of fish. And so, but yeah, habitat fragmentation, where you start carving it up into little bits, and habitat loss are sort of the major drivers globally, and climate change is only going to exacerbate that.
So I want to ask you about the wolf. They just opened hunting wolves. Do you know anything about that?
So as long as a species is on the endangered species list on the federal level, you can't do it with some carve outs. So you can generally, I can shoot a species to save somebody's life. So, the listing of the endangered species is required to look only at the science. But once it's on there, you have to deal with people. So there are a bunch of ranchers, take Yellowstone, for example, around Yellowstone is a big ranching community. And you say, I'm going to put some wolves in there. And everybody's reaction is, oh, great. And then they're going to wander out and they're going to eat my livestock. And that does happen sometimes. And so if a wolf left Yellowstone, it was allowed to be shot anyways, basically as a nuisance animal. What you have in some states is where the wolf has been taken off the federal endangered species list. It's not considered threatened. There's basically enough wolves. Then management gets turned over to the states. It's basically the state's animals to manage and trust for its people. And so the states can then issue hunting permits just like they can for deer or for any other animal within their boundaries. And so that's where you get these sanctioned wolf hunting seasons, or states have issued permits for people to hunt wolves.